Do you believe that 300 men can defeat an army of 135,000 soldiers? That a battle can be won without swords, without shields, only with trumpets and torches? How is it possible that the greatest military strategist in history wasn't Alexander the Great, nor Napoleon, but rather a frightened young farmer who hid in a cave? The answer will challenge everything you think about courage, strategy, and the impossible. The story of Gideon is proof that when you stop trusting only in your own strength, the impossible becomes inevitable. In the next few minutes, you'll discover how the greatest military victory of antiquity was conquered not by brute force, but by a strategy so bold that it forever changed our understanding of leadership and faith. This isn't just a story from the past, it's a manual on how to transform your greatest weaknesses into weapons of victory. Join us to discover how Gideon rewrote the rules of war and life. Israel. 1200 BC. The scorching desert sun beat mercilessly on the arid hills of Palestine. The air was thick with the smell of dust and despair. For 7 years, the Midianites had been invading the land like hungry locusts, devastating everything in their path. Imagine the horror. Entire families fleeing to caves in the mountains, carrying only what they could on their backs. The sound of camel hooves echoed through the valleys like thunder of death. Children cried from hunger while their mothers looked at the burned fields where golden grain once grew. The Midianites weren't just soldiers, they were a force of nature. Their black tents spread across the valleys like a dark plague. The smell of smoke from burned villages rose to the sky like bitter incense. At night, the orange glow of fires painted the horizon with terror. The people of Israel were broken, not just physically, but spiritually crushed. Men who were once proud warriors now bowed like beggars. Women who sang during harvests now whispered desperate prayers between silent tears. It was a time when hope seemed to have died, along with freedom. In the midst of this devastation lived a young man named Gideon. But don't think of a movie hero, think of someone like you on your worst days. Gideon was about 25 years old, hands calloused from working the land, and shoulders curved from the weight of responsibility to feed his family. On this specific morning, as the sun rose timidly on the horizon, Gideon was doing something no Israelite man should do, threshing wheat hidden in a winepress at the bottom of a damp cave. The place smelled of mold and fear. His hands trembled not just from physical effort, but from the constant terror of being discovered. Every sound from outside made his heart race. What if it's a Midianite patrol? He thought, cold sweat running down his forehead despite the stifling heat of the cave. Gideon wasn't brave, wasn't a leader, wasn't special. He was just a young man trying to survive, feed his family, and stay invisible enough to see the next dawn. He embodied what we all feel when life crushes us. Why me? I'm not cut out for this. I'm not strong enough. But sometimes, it's exactly when we feel smallest that we become candidates for the greatest miracles. Suddenly, the temperature in the cave changed. It didn't get colder or warmer. It got different. As if the very air had gained weight and presence. Gideon slowly raised his eyes, every muscle in his body tense like a rope about to snap. There, sitting under the oak tree at the cave entrance, was a man. But he wasn't an ordinary man. There was something in his eyes that made time seem to stop. His presence filled the space in a way that defied explanation. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," said the voice with an authority that penetrated not just the ears, but Gideon's very soul. Mighty warrior. Gideon looked around as if the stranger was talking to someone else. He who was hiding like a rat in his own land. His hands still held handfuls of wheat, living evidence of his cowardice. "Sir," Gideon replied, his voice coming out as a hoarse whisper, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our fathers told us about?" It was the question we all ask when life falls apart. Where is God when I need him most? The angel, because now Gideon was beginning to understand this wasn't an ordinary man, looked at him with eyes that seemed to see through him, not judging, but revealing potential that even Gideon didn't know existed. "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" The phrase echoed in the cave like a silent earthquake. Gideon felt his legs go weak. Save Israel, he who couldn't even thresh wheat without hiding. Before we discover how Gideon went from hidden coward to victorious general, and before we reveal the most brilliant military strategy in history, help me with something. If this story is moving you, if you're seeing that it's not about ancient history, but about personal transformation, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. And share this with someone who, like Gideon, needs to discover the strength they already have within them. Because what comes next will change your perspective on what's possible when you stop looking at what you don't have and start using what's in your hands. The first test came that very night. God asked for something that seemed suicidal, destroy his own father's altar to Baal, in the dead of night. With his heart pounding in his chest, Gideon and 10 servants tore down the structure that represented years of idolatry and fear. The sun rose and the city discovered what had happened. The crowd came furiously after Gideon. "Bring him here. He must die," they shouted, their voices echoing through the narrow streets like rabid dogs. But his father, Joash, surprised everyone. "If Baal is a god, let him defend himself. It was the first sign that something was changing, not just in Gideon, but in his entire family. Then came the news that froze the blood of the entire nation. The Midianites, Amalekites, and peoples of the east had united. They were no longer just seasonal invaders, it was a war coalition. 135,000 men armed to the teeth, with camels, horses, and war chariots, positioned themselves in the valley of Jezreel like a black cloud of death. Gideon called Israel to arms. To his surprise, 32,000 men responded to the call. For the first time in years, there was hope in the air. Finally, they had an army. But then came the most bewildering order any general could receive. You have too many warriors. Send away those who are afraid. 22,000 men left, more than half the army, evaporating like morning mist. Gideon was left with only 10,000 men against 135,000 enemies. The odds were 1 to 13.5. There are still too many, said the voice of God. In the water test, when the soldiers drank from the stream, only 300 men drank by lapping like dogs, keeping their eyes alert to danger. The other 9,700 were sent home. Now, it was 300 against 135,000. The odds, 12450. Gideon had only 0.2% of his original army. Any military manual would say, impossible. Give up. But sometimes, the impossible is exactly where miracles begin. Night was thick as black velvet when Gideon and his 300th men positioned themselves on the hills around the valley where the gigantic Midianite army slept. The valley looked like an ocean of tents, dotted by thousands of campfires that twinkled like fallen stars. Each man carried 3 things: a trumpet, a torch hidden inside a clay jar, and a courage that defied all human logic. The silence was so profound you could hear your own heartbeat. 135,000 men slept down there, unconscious that their defeat was being orchestrated by an army that would fit in a small football stadium. When I blow the trumpet, Gideon whispered to his commanders, his voice carrying an authority he didn't even know he possessed. All of you blow yours too, around the entire camp, and shout, for the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. The moment arrived, crash. 300 jars shattered simultaneously. The sound echoed through the hills like coordinated thunder. 300 trumpets exploded in unison, creating a deafening cacophony that tore through the quietude of the night. For the sword of the Lord and of Gideon, 300 voices roared like lions, amplified by the natural echo of the valley. Out of nowhere, 300 torches blazed on the hills, creating the illusion of a massive army completely surrounding the enemy camp. To the Midianites waking up in panic, it seemed they were surrounded by tens of thousands of warriors. The chaos was instantaneous and absolute. Half awake, soldiers grabbed their swords and began attacking any shadow that moved. In the darkness and confusion, Midianite killed Midianite, Amalekite attacked Amalekite. War cries mixed with cries of agony. The sound of metal cutting flesh echoed through the valley like a macabre symphony. Camels balked and trampled soldiers. Horses neighed in terror and knocked down their own tents. In minutes, the most powerful army in the Middle East was destroying itself while Gideon and his 300 men simply watched from atop the hills, torches in hand, witnessing a miracle that defied every law of physics and warfare. When the sun rose, the valley that once housed 130,000 warriors was covered with bodies and destruction. The survivors fled in total panic to their homelands, carrying only the terror of the night. When 300 men defeated an empire, Gideon had achieved the most impossible victory in human military history. But the real lesson wasn't in the brilliant strategy or supernatural miracle. It was in the transformation of a man who discovered that his greatest weakness could become his greatest strength. You know what changed everything? Gideon stopped, looking at what he didn't have, and started using what was in his hands. He didn't have a giant army, but he had willing men. He didn't have sophisticated weapons, but he had creativity. He didn't have military experience, but he had a just cause. Gideon's story proves that it's not the size of your problem that determines the size of your victory. It's the size of your willingness to trust that there's something greater than your own limitations today. You might be feeling like Gideon in the cave, hidden, afraid, thinking you don't have what it takes to face the Midianites in your life. They might be debts, broken relationships, dreams that seem impossible, or simply the feeling that you're not enough. But what if I told you that you already have everything you need? What if your weaknesses are exactly where your strength will manifest? Gideon teaches us that great victories don't come from great resources, but from great decisions. The decision to stop hiding. The decision to use what you have, even if it seems like little. The decision to believe you were made for more than just surviving. The 300 men didn't win because they were the strongest. They won because they were the most committed. And sometimes, commitment is worth more than talent. Determination is worth more than resources. And faith is worth more than strength. Your cave is not your destiny. Your fear is not your identity. Your story doesn't end with your limitations. If a frightened young farmer could become one of history's greatest liberators, imagine what's possible for you when you stop hiding and start believing that you were made to win battles that seem impossible. The question isn't whether you have what it takes. The question is, are you willing to find out?